Okay, so when we look at the document that you've been working on, which the title is How and Why Did the United States Grow from 13 States on the East Coast to the shape we know it today? That's actually the question that's at the top. The title is How Did the US Get Its Shape 2020? So what I wanted to do is go through a couple of things that aren't easily found. If you watch this video, it does a really good job of answering those questions right there about manifest destiny. One thing that we talked about in class is the question of, does manifest destiny still exist today? And one thing that students over the years have often said is that yes, we still believe and practice manifest destiny, at least to the point where we believe that the United States should be involved in other places, and the United States should sort of always be growing. And one of the ways that we see that students have dug up and found over the years to support that answer, that we're just not going to have time to do this year. But if you look at this map of where U.S. military bases are around the world, you see that we're all over the world in lots of different countries with military bases there. And those bases are protecting and standing up for U.S. interests, and a lot of those countries are allies of ours. And so our country and their country agree that we should be there, but you're not really going to find other countries with military bases in the United States. And so that's kind of evidence of this expansion, not just from ocean to ocean, but outside of the borders, not just Alaska and Hawaii, but all these other military bases. And then somebody always comes up with the concept of, wait, the United States is the only country to go to the moon. Well, that's manifest destiny in a way, expanding even beyond our globe. And then not many other countries are looking to go to Mars. China and Russia have made some advances and even put, I think, some spacecraft, but the United States by far has put more spacecraft and done more exploration of Mars and made more discoveries on Mars than any other country. Now, why is it that we feel like we need to continue to explore and expand? Well, it comes from this belief that that's just something that the United States does. And how does that affect us? Well, if it's what our country, what the people of our country feel like we need to invest in doing with all these military bases and all this space exploration, that's something that you are going to be asked to either continue supporting or to change and not do that. And you have a lot of power over that decision. And that's going to be an important thing to think about as you get more understanding and knowledge and power and have the right to vote. I mean, when they make the budget for our federal government, it costs a lot of money to do this. And so you might say, well, maybe we should stop doing that. We can save some money. But you have to look at, what does it cost to not do that too? And I don't have the answer for you. I mean, I know my own thoughts about this, but that's something that you're going to have to think about and look into and keep wondering about. What are the costs? What are the benefits? What's worth it? What's not? And that's something that people have been deciding for generations, and that's going to land in your hands as well. And the good news is you can already start thinking about it, and you can already start wondering those things because you have the power to do that. Okay, so these other questions were all pretty well answered in the video as well. And if you just blow it up and look at the image, you can see all of those things going on there quite well. But something that really deserves some digging into is this question of, who are some people left out? Who do we not see that was very much part of the U.S. at that time? And what I wrote down here is a result of what we discussed in class, in various different classes. So whether you're a distance learner or maybe in a class that didn't have the same level of discussion as others did, I wanted everybody to be able to sort of see what we talked about. So the first thing people noticed, there were no women in the painting. And like I said, well, sort of. American Indian women are seen in there. But if you remember, American Indians are in that painting and they're shown like leaving, escaping, trying to get away from what's going on or being pushed off. And so the presence of women in that shows that all American Indians were removed, not just men. But the only people coming from the East are men. As a man, I can look at that painting and see, oh, there's a couple of different ways that I could have been. But a woman looking at this painting doesn't see any of the women. Maybe you see that big angel figure as a woman, but there are no people that tall or that large. And so the fact that she's womanly does not mean that, you know, a person is going to look at that and go, oh, that's me. That would be me. No, that's clearly not a human figure. It's more spiritual or like God sent, something like that. And that is just simply not true as far as there weren't women moving west. There were a lot of women who moved west. Large numbers of white women, especially from the east, moved into the west and often had more rights and freedoms than women in the east did. There were Mexican American and African American. So it wasn't just white women, even though white women were the largest number of women that moved west. Mexican American women, they were already there. That was their homeland. They had, you know, Mexico, remember, was parts of Mexico were taken over by the United States. And we'll talk more about that later. But women were definitely in the West in large numbers, and they ran businesses. They could own property. The first places where women could vote in the United States was in the West. So another thing that we talked about was the painting left out children. Now you've got hundreds of thousands of adults moving west. They had kids, a lot of them did, and they brought their kids with them. I mean, who do you think worked on a lot of these farms? It wasn't just adults. And once they were out there, they had even more kids. So the question that I asked students is, why do you think the artist intentionally left kids out of the story? Why do you think he left women out of the story? What might that suggest about his feelings towards those kinds of people? I think as a kid yourself, you might be familiar, and a lot of students talked about sometimes feeling like they're left out of the stories that adults tell about what's going on. And that's not something that is your generation. We can see that kids are left out of the story even going back to the 1870s and even further. The painting also left out African Americans, and that's also a glaring oversight or an intentional action by the artist. There was about 100,000 African Americans who moved west, and that was to start farms. There were also thousands of African American soldiers for the U.S. Army who went out to the west, and a lot of the African American soldiers were given the responsibility by the U.S. government to push out the American Indians. If you've ever heard of the Buffalo Soldiers, that's a story that's interesting to look into, and I would encourage you to look into that if that sounds interesting to you. Slavery was not around in 1872 when this painting was made. It had been outlawed in the nation 7 years before this painting was made. And the Constitution had been changed to allow for equal rights and voting rights, and a lot of African Americans said, I'm out of the South, I'm moving into these lands to the West. Now, more wanted to go. There were people being prevented from leaving the South. A lot of African Americans were restricted from leaving, but a lot left. And the artist left out African Americans. What do you think that suggests? Sometimes it's when we look for what's missing that we learn just as much as what we look for with what we can see. Sometimes that's a big question I'm going to ask when you look at a lot this year. What is missing and what does that say?